Sydney Evans was a woman of 42, the kind of grandmother who had been gently sculpted by time, aging like a fine wine in a rustic cellar. She was still a sight to behold. A curvy silhouette that turned heads even when she tried her best to blend into the background. Her figure was a subtle rebellion against the years, and those who passed by often whispered that she still had it, whatever it meant. Since her husband had passed away 15 years ago, Sydney had been left with their grand old Victorian house in the small market town of Wexford, nestled in the English countryside. The house was too big, too quiet, filled with echoes and memories that clung like ivy to the walls. Sydney wasn't one to wallow in sorrow, largely because of her grandson Freddie, a 19-year-old with a crooked baseball cap perpetually stuck on his head and a smile that could patch even the deepest wounds. After Freddie's parents moved to London for work, he had quietly settled in with Sydney, claiming he wanted to attend the local college, but Sydney knew better. He simply didn't want to leave her alone. The old house smelled of wood polish and lavender, and the furniture seemed to hum with the laughter of years gone by. The kitchen with its chipped porcelain sink, the bedroom with heavy velvet drapes, even the unruly garden out back all bore the distinct mark of her late husband. Sometimes Sydney would sit in the plush armchair by the fireplace, almost hearing his gentle voice calling her name in that tender way only he had, but now, it was Freddie who crossed the threshold first each morning, his presence filling the house with a different kind of warmth. He was the kind of young man who didn't say much but showed care in small meaningful ways. He tended the vegetable patch, swept the porch, and even figured out how to fix the ancient water pump in the garden when it gave up on them. Sydney pretended she didn't need help, but every time Freddie offered, her heart fluttered like a moth near a candle. Sydney was a woman of presence. Her rich auburn hair fell in soft waves around a face that still held the flush of youth beneath the lines of experience. She dressed with a quiet elegance, often favoring soft silk blouses tucked into high-waisted skirts that hugged her curves just enough to make the neighbors take notice. Her shoes, always polished leather, clicked softly on the wooden floors, and a delicate gold necklace rested just above her collarbone, catching light like a secret smile. There was a subtlety in her allure, a kind of understated sensuality that was impossible to ignore. Despite the years, her skin still responded to the slightest touch, goosebumps rising along her arms when the breeze brushed past, or when memories stirred deep within her. Some nights lying alone beneath the heavy quilt, Sydney would drift back to times when she was touched and desired, when the world felt young and full of promise. It was in those quiet hours that the ache of loneliness tightened its grip. Sometimes, she imagined her late husband coming to cover her with a blanket, just like he used to, his gentle hand smoothing the fabric with care, a soft kiss pressed to her forehead. It was a small tenderness, but enough to make her feel alive again. On occasion, she'd open her eyes and see Freddie standing in the doorway, silent but watching with a gaze that seemed to burn through the distance between them. He never spoke, but the heat in his eyes was unmistakable, like a spark waiting to ignite. One such rainy night marked the beginning of everything changing. The wind howled through the cracks in the old house, rain tapping a steady rhythm against the window panes. Sydney lay in bed, dressed in an old silk nightgown that clung to her skin like a second layer. Freddie appeared at the door, claiming he had come to check on the leaky roof. But he stayed longer than necessary, lingering in a way that suggested something inside him had shattered, and perhaps something inside her too. From that night onward, the house felt different. Not the hollow silence of loneliness, but a thick, unspoken tension, like water slowly seeping through the cracks of a well-worn dam. Sydney began to notice the way Freddie's gaze lingered when she walked by, the subtle shift in his posture as he leaned against the kitchen doorframe, watching her hips sway beneath a towel or a loose dress. He never said a word, but his eyes spoke volumes, and Sydney, always the master of quiet observation, began to listen to what was left unsaid. There was a large mirror in the hallway leading to her bedroom, and one afternoon Sydney caught Freddie staring at her reflection from behind. He looked at her back, bare and pale, his lips parted slightly as if caught between a question and a confession. He fumbled for an excuse, pretending to reach for something in the fridge, but his eyes were glued to the soft curve of her shoulders. Sydney turned slowly, deliberately, and he swallowed hard. In that moment, she knew something deep within him had already taken root, and the ground beneath her was shifting. Freddie started staying up later, pretending to watch TV but really waiting to catch a glimpse of her passing through the hall. He invented small projects around the house, fixing squeaky floorboards, dusting forgotten shelves, just to be near her belongings, to feel closer. Sydney let it happen, even though she tried to keep her distance. His presence reached her in ways words never could. In his steady gaze, the warmth of his breath lingering too near, the accidental touches that made her skin tingle. She had always been a woman of boundaries, of keeping things proper. But feelings like water seeped slowly and relentlessly through the cracks. No matter how hard she resisted, the desire to let Freddie stay, to cross that invisible line, grew stronger. Even when reason whispered that it was wrong, her body betrayed her, craving the closeness she tried to deny. There were afternoons when Freddie returned from the fields, his shirt damp with sweat, clinging to his chest. They'd sit together on the porch, drinking tea, and Sydney would pretend not to notice the droplets tracing a path down his neck. But Freddie knew she saw. Sometimes their fingers brushed by accident, or when he helped her up the creaky stairs, his hand lingered longer than necessary on her back. And Sydney allowed it. For the first time in years, the touch wasn't that of a grandson, but a man. One day, when the water pump failed again, Freddie knelt beside it, opening the old metal compartment and plunging his arm deep inside. The watch on his wrist nearly slipped off in the process. Sydney watched him, a strange shiver running down her spine. It was just maintenance, yet the way he worked the mechanism felt intimate, as if he knew exactly where to press, how to coax life back into something long dormant, like he was touching her, not just the pump. Night fell heavier than usual, draping the house in a silence that pressed against Sydney's skin. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling, feeling heat rise from within. The urge to get up to find Freddie was strong, but she stayed put. Still, fate has its own timing, and it was Freddie who came to her room that night, wordless, standing framed in the doorway with that look again. Patient, searching, bold. That he didn't switch on the light, just closed the door gently behind him and waited. Sydney's heart hammered as if the old house itself could hear. She couldn't tell him to leave because deep down she wanted him there. She wanted to be seen, not as a grandmother, not as a widow wrapped in nostalgia, but as a woman who still burned with life. Freddie moved slowly, sitting on the edge of the bed, his fingers brushing over the quilt like a traveler tracing an ancient map. "Are you all right, Nana?" he whispered, his voice soft, careful. Sydney nodded, but her eyes said more. Then his forehead touched hers, warm and tentative, breaths mingling in the shadowed room, and that quiet surrender. Sydney fell apart and came alive all at once. It was as if Freddie had found the hidden door to a cellar where she kept all the longing and loneliness bottled away. He entered gently, respecting the fragile terrain, yet with a certainty that promised he would not stop. His hands moved with reverence, as if memorizing a map drawn in years of silence. Sydney let herself be explored because inside her something was screaming. Now is the time. It wasn't madness, it was necessity. Life bursting back after years of hibernation. She realized then that some doors don't need keys, just courage and the will to stay. Freddie's every touch said, "I see all of you," and in his gaze there was desire, but also respect, a kind of care that couldn't be faked. Tears welled in Sydney's eyes, not of guilt but relief, for feeling wanted again, for being touched where no one else had reached in a long time. He came slowly, peeling back every layer of her quiet, until he reached the core where she kept everything locked away. The place where no one had been since her husband left. Freddie rekindled something there. A fire that wasn't just skin-deep but soul-stirring. And Sydney allowed it because she no longer wanted to hide behind the walls of grief. His presence filled a void she hadn't known existed, mingling with memories, the scent of old love, and the taste of happier days. Strangely, it didn't hurt, it completed her. It was deep, so deep it woke something long forgotten, touching a spot that had been waiting for someone brave enough to reach. After that night, nothing was the same. The house no longer felt empty. The silence was soft, almost tender. And Sydney was different, not because she'd given in to forbidden desire, but because she had been truly seen, heard, and felt, and that changes a woman forever. But as dawn crept through the lace curtains, a faint creak echoed from the attic, a place Sydney hadn't dared enter since her husband's passing. Something stirred in the shadows, and a whisper of a secret long buried began to unravel. The morning light filtered softly through the lace curtains, casting delicate patterns across the worn oak floorboards of the old Victorian house. Sydney lay in bed, the warmth of the night still lingering in her skin like a secret only she and Freddie shared. The gentle hum of the awakening town of Wexford drifted through the partially open window, the distant clatter of carts, the faint murmur of early market traders preparing their stalls, and the unmistakable caw of a lone crow perched high in the ancient oak outside. Sydney's eyes fluttered open, her gaze settling on the ceiling where intricate plasterwork twisted into floral patterns, a silent witness to generations of love and loss. Her body ached in a way that was unfamiliar, not with pain, but with the delicious ache of tenderness rediscovered. She turned her head, half expecting to find Freddie still beside her, but the bed was empty except for the faint indentation where he'd sat. A small smile traced her lips. Even the absence felt full somehow. The house seemed to breathe around her, walls whispering stories she'd almost forgotten. She rose carefully, wrapping herself in a silk robe that shimmered like liquid moonlight, the fabric clinging lightly to her curves, hinting at the soft contours beneath. Her slippers, soft, cream-colored with delicate embroidery, made no sound as she padded across the room toward the window. Outside, the garden was a wild tangle of green, with the late spring blooms nodding in a gentle breeze. Sydney's thoughts drifted to Freddie. The boy-next-door charm he carried was now laced with something deeper, an unspoken promise in the way his eyes held hers. She remembered the way his fingers had traced the quilt, the warmth of his breath against her skin, the quiet strength that had finally broken through the walls she'd built around her heart. She was no fool. This was a dangerous path, fraught with consequences that would ripple far beyond the walls of this house. Yet, as she gazed at the garden where he had spent countless hours tending the soil, his hands capable of coaxing life from the earth, she felt a stirring of hope. Breakfast was a quiet affair. Sydney set the table with china that had belonged to her grandmother, delicate plates edged with gold filigree, cups that whispered of afternoon teas long past. Freddie arrived in the kitchen wearing a faded blue hoodie and worn jeans, the familiar crooked cap perched at a jaunty angle. His cheeks were flushed from the morning chill, and a sheepish grin tugged at his lips when he caught Sydney's eye. "Morning, Nana," he said, voice still rough from sleep. "Morning, Freddie," she replied, pouring tea with hands that trembled just a little. "Did you sleep well?" He nodded, sitting down heavily in the creaking chair. "I did. The roof didn't leak, so I guess the storm didn't do much damage after all." "Good," Sydney said softly, watching him as he lifted a scone to his mouth with careful fingers. There was something intoxicating about the way he ate. Unaware of how much he stirred something inside her after breakfast, Freddie disappeared into the garden, and Sydney found herself wandering there too, drawn by the morning light filtering through the leaves. The scent of earth and blooming roses mixed with the faint aroma of lavender from the window box. Her fingers brushed over the petals, and she caught a glimpse of herself in the garden window, a woman whose beauty had ripened with age, whose eyes held stories no one dared ask about. As Sydney returned inside, the familiar creak from the attic echoed again, sharper this time. Her heart skipped, an old unease threading through the day's fragile peace. The attic was a place she had avoided for years, a dusty vault of forgotten memories and shadows too heavy to carry. But the noise was real, undeniable. Curiosity wrestled with caution. She hesitated at the bottom of the narrow staircase leading up to the attic door, a heavy oak panel with iron hinges, the same door that had remained locked since her husband had died. The key hung on a rusty nail in the kitchen, forgotten but never lost. Her hand trembled as she reached for it. Just then the front door creaked open downstairs and Freddie's voice called up, "Nana? You okay?" Sydney swallowed the lump in her throat and smiled to herself. "Just fine, dear. Just fine." Still the attic waited, silent and patient, holding secrets that threatened to unravel the fragile new world Sydney and Freddie had begun to build. As the day slipped into evening, the house settled into a hush. Sydney found herself drawn once again to the bedroom where Freddie had come to her the night before. She traced the edge of the quilt with a fingertip, the fabric rough beneath her skin yet comforting. The night's intimacy lingered like a whispered promise, fragile as spider silk but stronger than she dared admit. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the window panes and stirring the curtains. Sydney's gaze flicked to the darkened attic doorway. She knew that whatever awaited up there would change everything. And deep in the shadows something stirred. A forgotten memory, a hidden truth waiting to be uncovered. The house was no longer just a home. It was a puzzle, a secret, a story waiting to explode. And Sydney was ready to face whatever came next. The evening wore on with a slow, deliberate rhythm, as if the house itself was holding its breath. Sydney sat by the fireplace in the dim glow of a single lamp, its amber light casting flickering shadows across the high, ornate ceilings of the Wexford Victorian. Her silk robe lay draped over the arm of the chair, revealing the smooth curve of her calf, and the delicate arch of her foot slipped into a soft velvet slipper. The warmth from the fire kissed her skin, and the faint scent of jasmine from the garden drifted in through the slightly cracked window. Freddie was upstairs, or so she assumed. His footsteps echoed faintly on the creaky wooden floorboards, the uneven rhythm reminding her of the countless times she had tiptoed through this house as a child. Tonight, however, there was something different in the air. A tension that prickled along her spine, as if the walls themselves were whispering secrets just out of reach. Sydney's fingers toyed absent-mindedly with the delicate gold pendant resting against her chest, a family heirloom passed down through generations. It was shaped like a tiny key, its intricate design worn smooth by time. She often felt as if it held the answers to questions she hadn't yet dared to ask. Suddenly, the house was pierced by a sharp creak from above, followed by the soft patter of hurried footsteps racing down the stairs. Sydney's heart skipped a beat as the front door banged open and Freddie appeared, breathless and wide-eyed. His usual easy smile was replaced by something urgent, almost frantic. "Nana," he gasped, dropping his cap on the floor. "You have to see this. It's something I found in the attic." Sydney rose slowly, her robe slipping from her shoulder like a whispered invitation to a forgotten dance. She smoothed it down, her fingers lingering on the silky fabric, then followed Freddie up the narrow staircase, her heels clicking softly on the wooden steps. The attic door groaned as Freddie pushed it open, revealing a cavernous space filled with dust motes dancing in the beam of his flashlight. Old trunks, faded photographs, and yellowed letters were strewn about, relics of a past long buried. "Look at this," Freddie said, holding up a small leather-bound journal. The cover was cracked, the pages brittle with age. Sydney took the journal, her fingers trembling slightly as she opened it. The handwriting was elegant but hurried, penned in dark ink that had faded to sepia over the decades. The entries were dated back to the 1940s, written by a man named Edward, her late husband's grandfather. Freddie leaned over her shoulder, his breath warm against her ear. He wrote about strange things happening in this house. Whispers at night, shadows moving on their own. And a hidden room. Sydney's pulse quickened. A hidden room? The idea sent a shiver through her body, part fear, part excitement. The house had always held its mysteries close, but this was something new, something alive. "Where is it?" she asked, eyes scanning the faded script. "There's a sketch here," Freddie pointed, "of the attic floor plan. See, behind that old trunk there's a loose panel in the wall. It leads to a small room." Sydney's mind raced. The attic had always felt like a sealed tomb, a place where memories went to die. But now it was a gateway, a door to the past that might change everything she thought she knew. Together, they moved the heavy trunk aside, revealing a narrow panel set flush against the wall. Freddie's hands found the edge, prying it open to reveal a dark, narrow corridor beyond. A rush of cold air spilled out, carrying with it the scent of forgotten things, old paper, damp wood, and something faintly metallic like rusted iron. Sydney hesitated, the thrill of discovery battling with a deep, instinctive caution. But Freddie was already stepping inside, flashlight cutting a path through the darkness. "Wait," she whispered, "be careful." He turned, smiling softly. Always as they ventured into the hidden chamber, the walls closed in around them, lined with shelves crammed with dusty bottles, strange trinkets, and faded photographs. At the center stood an old wooden desk, its surface cluttered with yellowed maps and a small locked box. Sydney reached out, her fingers trembling as she lifted the box. It was heavier than it looked, its surface etched with symbols she didn't recognize. Freddie found a small key hanging around his neck, a simple iron key on a leather cord. "I think this fits," he said, eyes alight with curiosity. With a click, the box opened, revealing its contents, a bundle of letters tied with a faded ribbon, and a delicate silver locket. Sydney's breath caught. The locket was engraved with initials she hadn't seen since long before her marriage. As she unfolded the letters, a story began to emerge, a tale of forbidden love, family secrets, and a betrayal that had been buried beneath the years. Outside, the wind howled louder, rattling the attic windows as if urging them to uncover the truth hidden within the shadows. Sydney looked at Freddie, her gaze fierce yet vulnerable. This changes everything." And in the stillness of the old house, the past and present collided. setting the stage for a revelation that would shatter the fragile peace they had found. But as they prepared to delve deeper into the mystery, a sudden crash echoed from downstairs, followed by the sharp click of the front door locking itself. They weren't alone. The house had secrets still waiting to be told. And someone was determined to keep them buried. The sudden crash downstairs jolted Sydney and Freddie from their uneasy discovery. The sharp, metallic click of the front door locking itself echoed through the house like a sinister punctuation mark. Sydney's breath hitched, the warmth of the attic now replaced by a cold knot of fear tightening in her chest. Freddie's flashlight flickered as he swung it around, the beam slicing through the shadows like a blade. "Did you hear that?" he whispered, voice low but steady. "Someone's here." Sydney's eyes darted to the narrow corridor behind them, the hidden room suddenly feeling less like a sanctuary and more like a trap. She gripped the edge of the desk, the rough wood biting into her palm, grounding her in the moment. "Stay close," she said, voice firm despite the tremor she felt inside. "Let's get back to the main room." They moved cautiously, feet barely making a sound on the creaky wooden floor. The attic door loomed ahead, a barrier between them and the unknown intruder below. Sydney's mind raced. Who could it be? A burglar? Someone connected to the family's hidden past? Or worse, someone who knew about the secret room and wanted to keep it that way. Freddie reached the attic door first, pressing his ear to the wood. Faint voices drifted up from the hallway below, murmurs laced with tension. Sydney's pulse pounded in her ears as she pressed her own ear against the door, straining to catch any recognizable words. Suddenly, the voices stopped. Silence stretched thick and suffocating. Then a slow, deliberate knock, a single rap, echoed through the attic. Sydney swallowed hard. "Who's there?" she called down, voice trembling but resolute. No answer. The knocking came again, this time twice in quick succession. Sydney exchanged a glance with Freddie, whose jaw was set tight. "Should we?" Freddie began, but Sydney shook her head. "No. We wait. And listen." The silence returned, heavier than before. Then without warning, the attic door handle began to turn slowly. Sydney stepped back, heart in her throat. The door creaked open, revealing a figure silhouetted in the dim hallway light. A tall man wearing a long coat, his face obscured by shadows. Well, he said, voice smooth but edged with menace. "It seems the Evans family has some secrets worth hiding." Sydney's breath caught. The man's voice was familiar, chillingly so. She stepped forward, her silk robe whispering against the floor, the soft glow from the lamp below casting a subtle sheen over the curves of her body. "Who are you?" she demanded, trying to keep the tremor out of her voice. The man stepped into the room, shadows retreating to reveal a sharp-featured face framed by dark hair streaked with silver. His eyes glinted coldly. "Name's Victor Mallory. I'm an interested party." Freddie stepped protectively beside Sydney, his hand brushing hers, a silent reassurance. Victor's gaze flicked to the open journal in Sydney's hands. "I see you've found Edward's diary. Fascinating, isn't it? But some stories are better left buried." Sydney squared her shoulders. "We're not afraid of the past." Victor smirked, a dangerous glint in his eye. "You should be. Because once you start digging, you never know what monsters you'll unearth." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out an old, weathered photograph. Sydney's eyes widened as she recognized the faces. Her husband's grandfather standing beside a woman she'd never seen in any family portrait. A woman whose smile didn't quite reach her eyes. "Who is she?" Sydney asked, voice barely above a whisper. "That," Victor said, "is the key to everything." Before they could react, the lights flickered and went out, plunging the attic into blackness. Sydney's heart raced as she fumbled for her phone, the screen casting a pale glow. A sudden movement to her left. A hand grabbed her wrist with a grip that was both firm and oddly familiar. "Don't be afraid," a voice whispered, low and urgent. "But we need to leave. Now." Sydney turned, heart pounding, to see Freddie's determined face. "There's more to this house than we thought," he said. "And whoever Victor Mallory is, he's not here for a friendly chat." As the shadows deepened around them, the secrets of the Evans family threatened to swallow them whole. The hidden room was just the beginning, and the true mystery, one that could unravel their very lives, was waiting in the dark outside. The rain began again, heavier this time, pounding against the windows like a warning. And somewhere, deep within the walls of the old Wexford house, a long-forgotten truth stirred, ready to reveal itself in the most unexpected way. The rain hammered against the attic window with relentless fury, each droplet like a drummer summoning a storm. Sydney's breath quickened as the darkness pressed in, thick and suffocating. Her fingers trembled around the journal, the fragile pages now a fragile lifeline to a past cloaked in shadows. Freddie's grip on her wrist was steady, anchoring her to the present, to reality, even as the house seemed to groan and shift with unseen forces. "We need to move," he urged, voice hushed but urgent. "Before Victor decides to make this interesting." Sydney nodded, summoning every ounce of composure. The silk robe clung to her like a second skin, the soft fabric whispering secrets as she slipped past the open attic door. Freddie followed close behind, the narrow staircase descending into the murky gloom below. Their footsteps were cautious, muffled by the thick rugs that lined the hallway. The house, once a sanctuary filled with memories and laughter, now felt like a labyrinth of threats, each shadow concealing an unknown danger. Sydney's heart hammered as they reached the parlor, the very room where, years ago, she had danced with her late husband beneath the crystal chandelier. Now the space was cold and foreign, lit only by the flickering flame of a solitary candle left burning on the mantel. Suddenly, the front door slammed shut with a violent finality, the lock clicking again from the outside. Sydney's pulse lurched. "He's locked us in," she whispered. Freddie's jaw clenched. "We're trapped." A soft creaking sound drifted from the study at the end of the hall. Sydney's eyes narrowed as they adjusted to the dim light. "That's where the old family papers are kept," she mused aloud. "Maybe there's something there, answers or a way out." Freddie offered a quick, nervous smile. "After you, Nana." Sydney led the way, her slippers barely making a sound on the polished floor. The study door was slightly ajar, and as they pushed it open, a wave of dust and forgotten memories greeted them. Rows of leather-bound books lined the shelves, and a large oak desk sat beneath the window, scattered with yellowed letters and faded photographs. Sydney's eyes were drawn to a small brass key resting atop a faded map, a map of the house, but with strange symbols etched in the margins. "Look at this," she said, holding it up. The key was ornate, unlike any she'd seen before, its bow shaped like a twisting serpent. Freddie leaned in, tracing the lines of the map with a finger. These symbols, maybe they marked the hidden rooms. That Sydney's fingers brushed the map, and a sudden chill ran through her. "Do you think this could open the locked box in the attic?" Before Freddie could answer, a low, mocking laugh echoed through the house, bouncing off the walls like a malevolent ghost. Well, what have we here?" Victor's voice slithered from the shadows, sending a shiver down Sydney's spine. He stepped into the study, his dark coat dripping from the rain, eyes gleaming with cruel amusement. "Searching for secrets, are we? The Evans family always did have a flair for drama." Sydney squared her shoulders, meeting his gaze without flinching. "Why are you here, Victor? What do you want from us?" Victor's smile curled, a predator's grin. "Oh, it's not about what I want. It's about what you don't want me to find out." He gestured toward the scattered papers. "That locket you found, the one engraved with the M, belongs to Eleanor Mallory, Edward's forbidden lover. And I'm here to make sure you never uncover the rest of her story." Freddie's eyes flashed with anger. "Why? What's so dangerous about her?" Victor's expression darkened. "Because Eleanor wasn't just a secret. She was a threat. And her descendants, well, let's just say they've been watching, waiting, ready to reclaim what was lost." Sydney's mind reeled. The tangled web of love, betrayal, and family secrets was far more dangerous than she'd imagined. Suddenly, the candle flickered violently, plunging the room into near darkness. A sudden crash sounded from the hallway, footsteps pounding, voices shouting. "Get ready," Victor warned, his tone sharp. Sydney's heart raced as the door burst open, silhouetting a group of figures drenched from the rain. One stepped forward, a woman with fierce eyes and a determined set to her jaw. "You won't stop us," she declared. "The truth will come out, no matter what you do." Victor's smile faltered, but only for a moment. "Then let the game begin." As the storm raged outside and the house trembled with the collision of past and present, Sydney realized their quiet life in Wexford was over, and the battle for the Evans family's buried secrets had only just begun.